Hello, and thank you all for coming to this lecture on American constitutional tradition. Some people might call it constitutional conservatism or originalism, but I always call it American constitutional tradition because I think it is extremely American the way I'm going to explain it, as well as just our tradition of how we should practice it. But mostly importantly, I want to go over this tradition's application in today's world, which is sorely lacking. First, a little about myself. I'm a trucker right now in life, but I have a bachelor's degree in political science, which is unfortunately is one of the most useless degrees ever, unless you want to be a lawyer. But that's about as far as anything official goes for me. I've studied most things by myself, offhand, in the political field as well as others for about 25 years now. And I consider myself just kind of having a jack of all trades approach to politics. I've also studied a little bit in sociology, psychology, history, philosophy, economics, and finance. And I also believe very much in the science part of political science. So I'm not going to be studying much policy here. We're talking about much policy here. In fact, I'm not really a fan of doing that. So if people want to listen to about, what are my opinions on abortion or gay marriage or Donald Trump, I might go over a little bit of that here, but not a lot, because I find discussing a lot of that stuff really useless without some other connection to what I'm actually talking about, because I'm not going to convince anyone. So, I take pride in specializing in political atomization. That's a big one for me. Atomization and classification. And then long-term strategizing is another one for me, because I feel like we don't do it now that much. And problem solving, and then just political trends and voter behavior and beliefs over time. Now, my views are also heavily influenced by my faith, because I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, this lecture won't try and convert anyone, but I recognize members are definitely going to be a large part of my audience, and I'm probably going to use a lot of instances from my religion, so the Bible, the Book of Mormon, and church history to get a lot of my points across. The religious aspect is a large part of the reason why I'm making these videos, because I feel like I'm being inspired to now. I've actually felt this way over a year now, probably almost 2 years, and started writing back then, because I felt inspired to do it. Which is funny because this year's the 250th anniversary, and I didn't even realize that. So, inspiration, I guess. But originally, there was actually one person, a woman I knew, who I was friends with. She said she inspired me to do this, actually, because she said she wasn't that into politics and she didn't understand it that much. And that's part of the reason why she wasn't. And so, even though I know most of my audience is going to be politically active, as well as church members, I really hope most of all to reach out to a lot of other people, either disaffected by politics or feeling uneducated on them, because I feel like this is actually going to be a major thing that I'm going to bring into the end of my lectures. I feel like they're a big way to solve a lot of the problems we're facing right now. Now, historically, politically wise, I was more libertarian when I was younger, definitely very conservative. But after my mission, I lost most interest in politics almost altogether ever since then. Now, and it's been about 10 years. So I struggled with any political affiliation. In fact, I'd be so bold as to say, like, to me, looking at the political landscape, I felt like Joseph Smith looking at the religious landscape in his day. And that came a lot because in my life, at least, I had seen 3 changes to the Republican Party. So it went from like the Reaganites to the Tea Party wannabe libertarians, now to Trump's nationalist populism. And I just always found myself thinking, what was the original right wing in America, and why does it keep changing so often? Why does everyone have so many different views of the Constitution, even just on the right alone, if it was supposed to be set in stone like they oftentimes claim? Like, wouldn't that make more sense if everyone agreed on what it meant? So that harkens back to Joseph again. And going back to him again here for one more moment, I have to describe the political discourse today surrounding the Constitution using almost the exact same words Christ did talking about churches back then, when he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, They draw near unto it with their lips, but their hearts are far from it. I also asked God about this problem. I prayed about it, and while sadly I didn't get a visitation, the answer led me down a long path to where I am today. See, most people who consider themselves conservatives nowadays will start in the late 1800s and early 1900s for when things started going wrong in America with the start of the progressive eras. Obviously, I disagree, and I'm going to illustrate why here. I studied the original arguments made by the Federalists and Anti-Federalists in the several states, not just Philadelphia. And I quickly learned that a lot of those agreements were starting to be broken almost immediately after the country was formed. And it's only gotten worse from there. Now, I found out all this by studying from the Anti-Federalist perspective for once, because I hadn't realized that all through my time in political science, I'd only ever been taught really just the Federalist view of history, or I guess even you could say abolitionist view of history, which we'll get into that a little bit later, which is kind of an offshoot of the Federalist view in some ways, or nationalist view. But it's treated all monolithically. It's like, oh, this is what these people believed, and you should believe that. And that's all I was ever taught, and I'm pretty sure that's all anyone else has ever been taught. The Anti-Federalist contributions, ideas, and warnings were genius and prophetic, but they have been reduced to just the Bill of Rights. Like, that's what they gave us. That's their contribution. And then we completely ignore and forget everything else today. Now, in large part, this is because a lot of their arguments were repeated by the South later on. And in some ways, they were tied to slavery and race issues later in the 1900s. And because of that, unfortunately, like a lot of other traditions in the world, we throw the baby out with the bathwater when we change things. However, having gone through all these things, the Constitution wasn't an arbitrary thing anymore that's supposed to change on command. You hear a lot of times people today say, like, oh, it's a living document and can be whatever we need it to be in the moment. And I guess my thought would be like, well, how is it anything then if it's just so amorphous? How can it be anything? And so since I learned this way, the document wasn't arbitrary anymore. It was an actual in-stone thing. And so I wanted to teach this understanding to others. Now, I compared what the founders believed then and what has happened since then, and kind of looked at what maybe they got right and what they got wrong, not just on policy issues like, say like what they believed about race or something like that, not that, but just in the Constitution itself, like the laws that they made. And I came up with a new view just based on their laws and procedure, not just based on their laws and procedures, but the reasoning behind their laws that they made and why they believed them. And I also, on top of that, use our own country's history, which they obviously didn't have. And so I like to think I'm looking back at things while they were looking forward at things using the history that they had at the time. So I call this new view Neo-Jeffersonianism. I will be expanding upon it more in this lecture alongside the study of the document and government itself, but mostly at the end. Now, to start in this lecture, I will go through the three branches of government, then to the powers of states of the central government, and each time there's going to be a contrast made between what we have now and what people believe about it, and what was said by the founders with an emphasis on what was agreed upon in the constitutional debates, on what things meant in the Constitution. At the same time, I will also be including tidbits of how to truly act and think constitutionally for now and the future, as well as how to learn lessons from the past. This will finish with a full outline of where we are, where we can go from here, and with a fuller explanation of what Neo-Jeffersonianism is. Now, I also wanted to get a little bit into what the church believes, and I'm going to kind of compare what I believe to them because they're slightly different. And then I'm going to give homework to everybody. I know everybody loves homework. But I'm going to be honest with you up front if me saying that I slightly had a different view than the church doesn't scare everyone away. Everyone is going to be offended by what I have to say in the end, no matter how right they think I am right now and how much they think they agree with me. Because I guarantee you, at some point you don't. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here, so I'll save that for the rest of the lectures. So without further ado, let's get started. This has been The Midnight Rider, and I will see you on down the road.